Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. I have a very special guest and one of my good friends, and I'm so excited to have a great conversation with him today. So please, Entelecheia, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
So I am Entelecheia. I am a Thelemite and an author and a lecturer on the subjects of spirituality, spiritual philosophy, spiritual liberation, with a strong focus on Thelema. And I'm really glad to be here today and talk with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And what a joy it is to have the opportunity to talk to another Thelemite. So, how did you get into Thelema?
So about 11 or 12 years ago, I started getting into Buddhist meditation. I took a mindfulness-based stress reduction course, which is kind of Buddhist meditation light. And after the course was over, I was just interested in any kind of resources that I could get my hands on about Buddhist meditation, specifically Vipassana. And one of the books that I found was called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha by Daniel Ingram. And it's a highly unusual book because it deals with Buddhist meditation technique, but it's also like part cultural polemic against sort of contemporary Western Buddhist thought. And one of the chapters in that book was on what's called the cities, or the magical powers in the context of Buddhism. And one of the things that he talked about in there was also ceremonial magic in connection with the Buddhist magical powers. And he recommended a book called Modern Magic by Donald Michael Craig, which I'm sure you're familiar with and a lot of your viewers are as well. And that was my introduction to ceremonial magic. I read some of that book and I started doing some of the practices out of it. Ultimately, I became much more focused on meditation, and I found a meditation coach, and I really poured myself into practicing Buddhist meditation for about 2 years. And then after doing that for about 2 years and going on various retreats and exploring, the world of Buddhist meditation, something pulled me back to ceremonial magic. And I went back to Modern Magic by Donald Michael Craig and started doing the techniques in there. And right around that time, a friend of mine suggested that I check out Aleister Crowley, who I really had very little knowledge of at that point, but he suggested that I read a book called Perturabo by Richard Kuczynski, and very entertaining biography. I see it on your bookshelf back there, and I read that book that summer, and I thought it was really fascinating. And right around the same time, I found David Shoemaker's work on YouTube, Living Thelema, and I was really intrigued by how the tarot and the tree of life could be used to map out the progression of states of consciousness up through various states and stages of awakening and enlightenment. It seemed to run parallel to the models of awakening that I was familiar with in Buddhism. And so I ended up getting a tarot deck and laying out all the cards on the floor and realizing that the major arcana mapped onto the paths of the tree of life. And it just was really engrossing for my brain. And that summer, well, actually that fall, I ended up moving to Seattle. And when I got out here, one of the first things that I did was look to see if Ordo Templi Orientis was out here. I had become familiar with OTO back when I was living on the East Coast, but there was no local body near me. And it turned out that there was a local body about a 5 or 6 minute drive right down the road from me, and that they were celebrating the Gnostic Mass that weekend. And so I went and I attended Gnostic Mass, and pretty much the rest is history. I've been in OTO for a while now, but I really started getting very passionate about studying Thelema maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. And so I really poured myself into understanding Aleister Crowley at that point, and the rest is history. So that's basically the story of my journey.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. And what a great introduction to have Perturabo and Living Thelema right there at your fingertips from the start. I love to hear that. And I hope more people coming at this for the first time don't feel like they have to dive headfirst into Crowley's writings, um, and to get a little help with books like Living Thelema and Perturabo and stuff like that. So,
It's really interesting. When I was still on the East Coast, that was the heyday of the Speech in the Silence podcast, which
oh,
was
cool, cool.
being broadcast out of the Bay Area, and it really gave there were so many resources there. Living Thelema was one of them, and there were lots of different talks and classes, and it really gave the impression of a very vibrant culture on the West Coast. So it was actually another impetus for me to move out here. I was like, wow, it almost seems like there's like this whole kind of hip movement going on. So it was a perfect time to perfect entry point, perfect entry time for Thelema for me.
That's awesome. And one thing I always like to ask practitioners about is what their daily, weekly, or monthly regular practice looks like. And what's a real joy for me as a Thelemite talking to another Thelemite is our practices can look so different, even though we're, the idea is maybe we're doing something the same or within the same system, but that could look so different. So, what does that practice look like for you?
So my practice, first and foremost, looks like physical and mental self-discipline. So core for that is actually sleep for me. Shortly after that comes proper exposure to sunlight and getting outside and touching grass, as it were. I find that exposure to natural light actually helps with my sleep. And with my sleep is dialed in and I'm getting a good 7 to 8 hours each night, that is positive for almost everything else. I am also a very strong believer in constantly questioning what I am doing and what I'm thinking. So there's an element of mental self-discipline there. And certainly in terms of asking, how does this serve my true will? How does this serve the actual purpose that I'm here on Earth for? So that's a crucial part of my practice. Another crucial part of my practice is awareness of death. This is a practice that goes back to ancient times that is largely associated with the tradition of Stoicism, constantly reminding oneself, yes, I will die. I am here for a limited time on this planet. I am here for a purpose. I need to stay focused on that. If I find myself lost in thought, ruminating, going down a particular trail that I probably shouldn't be down, I try to stop and ask myself, okay, why am I thinking about this right now? What brought me here? Sometimes there's an answer, sometimes there isn't, but doing that kind of checking in. Generally, every morning while coffee is making, I will sit on the couch quietly with eyes closed and meditate for about 5 minutes. And when thoughts come up, just stepping back and asking myself, okay, where did this come from? What's happening right now? And doing that kind of checking in. That and diet and exercise are really sort of make up the comprehensive whole of my sort of daily self-care. Some of it's more traditional kind of sounding spiritual practice. Some of it is just, basic grounding practice and good mental and physical health practice. As far as on a weekly basis goes, I do a work of Eucharistic magic on a weekly basis. I've had that discipline up for several years now. So that can either be doing a private ritual at home, or if there happens to be Gnostic Mass that week, I will take communion at Gnostic Mass. But whether or not there is Mass, I will consecrate and consume a Eucharist on a weekly basis. As far as on a monthly basis goes, I will sometimes do a more traditional magical working in terms of a path scrying or a spirit summoning of some kind. I am part of a couple of sort of small spiritual magical groups that get together on occasion and will do a path working. It could look like a ritual to Hecate on the new moon, like I just did last night. Um, another kind of working that is from Crowley's Libra Arcanorum he has a whole set of sigils and spirits in there. I have a friend who is a connoisseur of doing those types of rituals, and so we frequently end up doing those as well. And that's pretty much the sort of stuff that I do. It's a lot of meditation, reflection, and then with occasional more sort of acute ritual magical working.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So how important would you say is ritual to the practice of Thelema?
Well, I would say that it depends what you think that ritual is. I take a very broad view of ritual. So I would take my regular sitting down every morning while the coffee is brewing and reflecting to be a kind of ritual because it's a repeated kind of practice. Generally speaking, when people think about rituals, they think of something more like the Star Ruby or the LVRP or Resh or something of that nature. I think that the purpose of that kind of activity is to interact with the truths of the spiritual system that you're in using your body and using your imagination. So it is a way of interacting body, soul, and mind with things that are normally abstract and invisible for us. And I think that that's actually incredibly important because when we interact with things just with our minds and they remain abstract, it's not as powerful as when we can interact with them through our sight, our smell, our taste, our touch, right? Our hearing, all of it. And magic allows lots of different ways to do that. You can crack open your Liber 777 and find, multiple ways of participating in truth with your body. And so oftentimes, even if I'm doing a meditation practice, I will open it up with a Star Ruby. So that way I am interacting already with the sort of thelemic understanding of the cosmos. And then I situate myself in the center of that and settle down to the meditation practice. For that matter, meditation is also a ritual because you are perceiving deep truths of existence through the breath, which is a physical sensation. So it's also, I also view that as a kind of ritual, even though most people draw, contrast between meditation and ritual. I see more of an overlap because they both involve symbols and they both involve bodily and imaginal participation. So the short answer, yes, ritual is incredibly important, not just to Thelema, but for most spiritual systems that I know of.
Yeah, well said. And I do agree with you on meditation being a part of ritual, if not a ritual in and of itself. I often see that sort of disconnect happening with that kind of work, but it's so important and such a foundational practice to so much work out there. So, not to change gears too much, but we are both in Ordo Templi Orientis, or the OTO. Would you mind sharing what are your roles within the OTO?
Sure, my pleasure. So I have been in OTO for, oh my gosh, it was just 9 years, a couple weeks ago that I took Minerval. I am an ordained deacon and priest in Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica, which is the ecclesiastical or religious arm of OTO. And I am a chartered initiator, so I can initiate people up through the third degree of Mysteria Mystica Maxima, which is the mystery school portion of OTO. And in addition to that, I currently serve as Master of Horizon Lodge in Seattle, Washington. So I have lots of hats that I wear.
Yeah, it seems like you really stay busy with that. So what is something you wish you knew before joining the OTO?
I wish that I had a better understanding of what the purpose of OTO was when I joined. The first time that I showed up at an OTO event, I don't think I really understood that there was a difference between OTO and AA, for instance. I
Mm-hmm.
walked in excited, to like let's learn magic. I'm really into these, maps of attainment as well. Let's start talking about that and how we're going to do that. And people are like, hey, cool your jets. This is a completely different thing here. And that was just really the first of, I think, many misunderstandings about what the purpose of OTO was. I think what I would convey to people is that OTO serves Crowley had a few different purposes for OTO in mind, and it grew over time, because when he first joined, the main purpose of OTO was to safeguard the secret of the sanctuary of the Gnosis, which is widely understood to be a secret of sexual magic. And as he fused or infused OTO with Thelema and began to write initiation rituals that taught Thelemic doctrine and Thelemic belief, the purpose of it changed over time. So he eventually added the purpose that it is meant to instruct individuals in the profound mysteries of birth, life, and death so that they can discover their true will. And eventually it became about promulgating Thelema and having a special role to play in the context of the new aeon. So I think that when people come to OTO, it's very common for them to either think that it is a school of magic, sort of like Hogwarts, or that it is just simply a club for people who happen to be interested in ceremonial magic or witchcraft, or, with sort of a Crowley bent or a kind of peripheral interest in Aleister Crowley and Thelema. And I think the purpose of it is a little bit deeper than that. I think it's meant to help people understand what their true will is, and it's meant to provide a model society of people who are similarly interested in that task. And it is about structuring the relations that you have with yourself, with the world, and with other people that will best bring out your true will and allow you to accomplish it. So it's actually a much thicker view of human life than I think people really understand when they come in. Although now people are showing up at Horizon, I've noticed, understanding this because they've seen my videos, and so I know I'm not here to learn, the Star Ruby. I'm here to learn my true will, and I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. It's like a whole new aeon indeed. So yes, that is what I try to. That is what I would like people to understand about OTO.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I'm so glad that you've been getting people who have more reasonable expectations. And, I guess in my experience, for those who don't know, I'm also a local body officer here. And, we seem to get a wide variety of people and expectations. And I think that's going to be a disappointment, regardless if your expectations aren't in line with with the program and what's going on. You're going to be disappointed, whether you expect too much or too little. So I think that's something to keep in mind, because I know a lot of people watching this right now may not be a member of the OTO or may want to know more about it. And I think that's, in general, good advice to manage your expectations and come at it, more kept in check, I suppose. So
Well, I know you have a very different perspective on OTO than I do. We're in different parts of the country, and you've been in for a shorter period of time than I have. What would you try to convey to people about OTO that they might not know coming in?
yeah, I think that's a great question. So in general, I think that's something that gets lost in translation is that the OTO is a magical fraternity. So the main focus of what we're doing is around the law of Thelema and magic. And when we come together to do these rituals, they serve a greater purpose than just simply making friends or meeting your other significant other. And, I know people, especially later in life, the older we get, we look for opportunities to make friends and make those connections for interpersonal relationships. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're here for a purpose, and that purpose isn't necessarily dating. A lot of people come to the OTO with the expectation of ritual, magic, discovering their true will. And so I think if you're coming into a fraternity like this expecting to get a date, I think that's an expectation that's really out of line with reality. And like I said, I don't want to discourage people from, finding their significant other. Of course, that happens all the time within the OTO, but I think expecting that to happen, I think, is where people might be a little saddened, perhaps, and not the best expectation to have.
I think that's very well put. I would also add that people sometimes get it into their heads that OTO is their family, and I try to dissuade people from looking at it that way as well. It's people get disappointed that way. They don't understand that, when they leave or find a different path in life, which is very, natural to happen. OTO is not for everyone. That sometimes the relationships that they built in OTO aren't as long lasting. They don't survive that. So it is for better or for worse. I would say for better. It's not a family relationship. So but I think what you said is very well put, coming in with that expectation. Things can happen organically. They happen organically all the time, but it is organic. It's not something to be expected.
Yeah, we don't do blind dating in the OTO. We don't, as far as
Oh
I
yeah,
know.
no,
That won't be something that happens.
no,
Perhaps you might be better off like doing Tinder or some of these other websites and coming to the OTO.
sure.
Yeah. So, but yeah, in general, the OTO is great, and it provides a lot of opportunities, especially for group ritual. At least in some OTO bodies, provide that opportunity. So, as a Thelemite, how do you interpret or approach the works of Crowley?
So it's changed a lot over time. I would say for a long time it was just simply trying to get a sense of what any of this was about, or what was distinctive about it, or what sort of made up the Thelemic worldview, or what made someone a Thelemite. But the position that I've gradually come to over the years is that change or becoming is really at the center of Thelema. It's really about embracing dynamic change in life, dynamic change all the way down to the core of who and what you are. And that makes it different in some ways from other forms of spirituality that are more about embracing the unconditioned or unconditional stillness, or having it be all about bliss states. Thelema is a more portable spirituality, in the sense that our world is always changing. So it's incredibly useful to have a deep spiritual approach to and spiritual understanding of change and of becoming. And a lot of people are also very interested in personal growth, self-transformation, self-development, self-transcendence. So Thelema has a lot to say to that particular urge in a person. The way that I tend to understand dynamic change in Thelema is through the dynamic interplay of opposites. So I have what might be termed a kind of open-ended dualistic view of Thelema, insofar as I think that most of Thelema is driven by the polarity between Nuit and Hadit. So for those of you viewers who don't know, Nuit and Hadit are the deities that are represented in the first and second chapters of the Book of the Law, respectively. So the Book of the Law is the sort of central revelation of Thelema. It's our central holy text. So the first chapter is sort of spoken on behalf of Nuit, who is the goddess that represents heaven or infinite space. The second chapter is Hadit, who is the point for basically simultaneously the point and also the force of will, the force of change in the world. And then the third chapter is their combination, Rahor Kuit or Heru Raha. And so the way that I tend to understand Thelema is as the open-ended, dynamic, erotic interplay of Hadit and Nuit, which means that it is a constant dynamic interchange between the deep core of who we are, what Crowley refers to as true self, which is not your normal sense of self. It's almost like buried in the unconscious, but it's a general striving or an urge to unite with the world around us. So my interpretation really kind of kicks off or centers upon this idea that the deepest part of ourselves strives to have full contact with the deepest, most profound aspects of reality or nature all around us. And it can take lots and lots of different forms. It can take the form of becoming really engrossed in playing a sport, or doing martial arts, or rock climbing, that kind of sense of dynamic exchange between the deep part of yourself and the world, where you get into what's called a flow state. You can also experience it while playing a musical instrument or even listening to music. You can get it while painting, you can get it while reading or writing. And whatever sort of experience that it is that gets you into that kind of deep flow state where your sense of self-consciousness starts to fade and you're in the zone, these are all really important clues to what Crowley calls your true will. So your true will, as I understand it, is really given to you. Your true will is really that those spots that you're naturally drawn to that allow you to enter into these flow states, this very close union between Hadit within and Nuit without. Obviously, falling in love is another tremendously powerful example of this, where the deepest part of yourself is opening and revealing to the deepest part of another person. And so it's like this sensation of falling into each other and strong connection with reality. And this metaphor of love is extremely important in Thelema, because Thelema is ultimately about that dynamic union, that ongoing union between ourselves and the world. And of course, it also describes mystical experiences. People express mystical experiences exactly the same way. I became one with everything, or my consciousness blurred into the cosmos, or I felt this tremendous sense of being loved, right? So it's a very flexible sort of understanding of human experience that actually covers a very wide array of phenomena. So I think that my interpretation of Thelema tends to very much focus on that dyadic, right, that two-part erotic dimension of union between the deepest part of ourselves and the deepest part of the universe.
Really beautifully put. Really, I love that. And I guess not, this is your interview, but I think one thing that stood out to me was, of course, your discussion around truth and getting in touch with that, getting in touch with this deeper truth within ourselves. I think certainly, definitely, I connect with a lot. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And so if someone's listening to this and they're like, wow, this really connects with me, I really relate to this, what would you recommend in terms of beginner books for someone coming at this the first time? What should they start out reading?
Well, I would suggest most of all that they read my book, which is about to come out. I'm putting the finishing touches on it at the moment. It is called Erotic Liberation, and it is actually a collection of lectures that I've given on the subject of Thelema over the last 4 years. They are not actually all beginner lectures in the sense of being introductions to Thelema. The first essay in it is just called What is Thelema? And it explains Thelema very similarly to how I just did a moment ago in terms of this erotic relationship. I would say that the strength of some of the other essays in it is that they don't dwell exclusively on Thelema, but tend to touch more on broader spiritual issues like spiritual dissatisfaction or spiritual liberation generally, or meaning and purpose in life, and tend to approach them through a Thelemic lens. I will say that if you read this book of mine, you're going to be getting my particular take on it. And I should point out that I don't actually read a lot of books that are like this, and that's on purpose. So I would say that your foundations when you're approaching Thelema should really go in this order. First, you want to have a solid understanding of your own mind and what counts as good evidence, or what counts as a good reason to believe something. That's a skill that you should build throughout your life and carry around with you. Start to notice where your own biases are, where your gullibility is. Everybody's got them. I've got them, right? It's why I constantly ask myself throughout the day, hey, why are you thinking what you're thinking right now? Calling that into question. So that's really the first foundation for anybody doing anything. After that, I would say you would study, right, the best sort of understanding that we have about the world within whatever sphere it happens to be that you're interested in. So Thelema being a religion or a spiritual path, you want to have a solid understanding of what religion and spirituality basically are, and what religions and spiritualities they have been throughout history. Crowley himself made his students do this. They had to have a comprehensive understanding of world religion and world history generally before doing anything more exotic, really, or they had to build it along with doing more exotic practices. After that, I would say study Aleister Crowley himself. This is not easy. Aleister Crowley had a very high IQ, probably higher than mine, and I am not a dumb person. He had very high verbal intelligence, and he seemed to have incredibly low empathy for his audience because his works are often very difficult to comprehend. I think even when he sincerely wanted to explain himself in terms that the average person could understand, he usually wasn't able to do it. I don't think he could very easily put himself in somebody else's shoes. But you have to challenge yourself to do it. You have to push yourself to do it. In my opinion, people too easily or too quickly go to secondary literature, books like mine, for instance, and they really need to spend a lot more time pushing themselves and challenging themselves and going through the discomfort of getting to know Crowley himself. So I put together a website a few years ago. It's called Mouth of the Beast. And I actually put some what I consider to be introductory Crowley texts on there. My recommendation, I think there's like maybe 11 or 12 of them on there. My recommendation would be to go on there, start with the shortest one, which I think is probably Message of the Master Therion. It's like maybe one page and read that. And then find the second longest one, which might be, I don't know what it is, maybe Duty, I think is on there, right? And then read that. And then find the third longest thing and read that, and just gradually get used to reading and understanding Crowley. You're gonna have to look up a lot of words and you're gonna have to read things 2 or 3 times, but just push yourself and challenge yourself to do it. It's actually more important that you learn that habit and condition yourself to that way of thinking and become comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's the real determining factor in success with understanding Crowley. It's not reading any particular thing necessarily. You want to develop an ethos where you don't shrink away from hard work. That is actually going to be a stronger factor in your success. And then I would say once you have that kind of understanding, then waste time reading. You can waste time reading things like that. But like I said, I don't consume the kind of stuff that I write. I really don't, because it's actually the least important to me. So that's generally how I would suggest go. I know I'm not selling my book very well, am I? But at least I'm honest. Maybe my honesty will help people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will go ahead in the description of this video have the link to the website, and as well as a bunch of other Entelecheia's links, so our listeners can very quickly click on those and go check it out. But yeah, I think that's really solid advice. And I guess I just want to encourage people to not give up, to know that we've all struggled with Crowley's writings. They're very difficult. I remember when I was first starting out, I was told to read 2 authors and no one else. And that was Aleister Crowley and Kenneth Grant. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to decipher both of those people before I even knew David Shoemaker existed.
Interesting.
So I don't want people to have that same experience. But if they do have that same experience, it's okay. Stick with it.
It builds character, and let me tell you, there is nothing easy in Thelema. There are no shortcuts here. I think sometimes people are attracted to Thelema because they think that it's a path of indulgence, and it doesn't require them to withdraw from the world. It doesn't require them to stop drinking or stop having sex or stop making money. And so they think, wow, it's a non-renunciate path that makes it really easy. And that's not true. A non-renunciate path is harder because you are constantly surrounded by temptation to get involved in all kinds of foolishness. So if anything, it requires more discipline and more grit. So yeah, start building that grit right away. Sit down with Crowley, push yourself to do it. It's going to be hard. The tough work will build character, I promise.
Absolutely. And so along with a reading list and getting started there, what are some of the most important magical tools for Thelemite to own, in your opinion?
A healthy sense of skepticism and self-criticism to begin with. That is self-criticism is a very important tool to apply to oneself under all circumstances. I would say the second very important tool would be what I was just saying, which is your self-discipline and your grit, and understanding that We are immensely plastic creatures, and through difficulty and hard work, you will transform yourself, and that is very important. Another one would, of course, be courage. If you are going to engage with this world, and if you are going to be honest with yourself and with other people and come into your true will, you are going to need mountains and mountains of courage, along with emotional detachment, which is part of discipline. And I would also recommend learning to listen and to humble yourself. Reading Aleister Crowley is extremely difficult stuff, and you're going to actually have more to learn than you realize. So I just gave you the 4 powers of the Sphinx right there: knowledge,
I love
will,
that.
courage, and silence. If you want magical tools to go along with them, it's the dagger that represents knowledge, right? So you can go and make your dagger, and the whole time you're doing it, you can ask yourself, why am I making this dagger? I
Yep.
should be self-critical of my of somebody telling me to do something. And so that is the weapon that will separate truth from falsity. And your courage is, I believe, the cup that will hold. Oh no, wait, am I getting those wrong? Courage, I think, is fire. That'd be your
Yeah, is
wand.
that the wand?
That'd be your wand. That's your directed.
Yeah.
That's your
Yeah.
directed will. Silence is the disc, which is earth, and then the remaining one would be the cup.
Which is water. Yeah.
Yeah, which one did I miss? Courage, will, maybe will. I don't know. I think I mixed up will and courage. Anyway, if you need physical objects for them to serve as reference points of meditation, those would be your 4 magical weapons right there. I think anybody who practices ceremonial magic ends up making the weapons at some point, or procuring something at a shop that has some special significance to them. It sort of evolves organically from the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess my whole trip, I go on long tangents all the time about making your own tools and implements, and the act of creation itself being, a very mindful activity that's so important to someone as a magician, especially if you're stuck in your head and you need something external to do. Creation and with your hands, whether it's painting or sewing or carving or building clay. I mean, all of these things are fantastic. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter if you're good at it or not. It's the fact of doing it. You know, I love doing embroidery on a lot of my ritual things, and at the end of the day, I'm not professional, right? A lot of my stuff looks janky, it looks weird, but it was the act of creation, and that's what matters. So if someone needs those implements, I definitely encourage them to create them themselves. But if you don't feel called to that, buying them from someone else or just using something already pre-made is valid too. So
I agree with you, and it's actually one of the things that I very much enjoyed when I first started doing magic, was creating my own tools. I am not good at working with my hands at all. I am almost a complete and total disaster at it, but I applied myself, and I managed to not cut off any fingers, or burn down the house while doing it. And all the tools that I made are still functioning. But yeah, just what you said. It gets you out of your head and gets you into your body, and it's a meditative practice. And after years of having done meditation, which really didn't require me to do anything at all with my hands, except keep them folded in my lap, I thought it was a really interesting and fun change of pace to do it. So I advocate it.
yeah, absolutely. And especially if someone is struggling to sort of visualize these things, um, having external representations of them, it can be really helpful. Also, if you're just studying, right? Like if you're studying these rituals, you're studying Crowley, and you're like, I can't keep all this huge list of correspondences in my head. That can just be such a great way to study. It's like, okay, I have the smells and bells, and I'll remember this ritual and associate this with that. And that just helps you deepen the symbol set. Sort of on your soul and in your mind.
Agreed
But yeah,
completely.
awesome. So, where can people find you on the internet and support what you do?
So I have a website which is called lapis-makurii.org. I know I use like really hard to spell names for everything, but I guess you can include it in the description. But
Absolutely.
I have a blog there. It also has links to recordings of I think all of the lectures that I've done. It also has a link to my YouTube channel. I've done some videos on there. I also have a page on Facebook, Frater Entelecheia. where I will post articles and lectures and stuff. I'm also sometimes active on Twitter. I try to sometimes drop in there and say interesting things sometimes, and I will sometimes copy them over to Facebook. So I've been super busy lately writing lectures, so I have not had a ton of time to write blog articles or do videos, but more will be forthcoming. I'm quite a prolific author, so there's plenty of stuff on there to look at already if that's what you're interested in.
Yeah, Entelecheia is like one of my favorite people to follow on Twitter. Absolutely fantastic. And when your book does come out, how can people find it? Will you be advertising on your website, or what do you
Yeah,
have?
it'll be available
Okay.
through Barnes and Noble. I will post the link. I'm making some last minute, very minor edits. I'm actually waiting for the final copy to come in the mail. I think it should be coming any day now. And once I do that, I will be broadcasting it. I was yelling about it from the tops of the mountains and from the rooftops. So
Absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much for this interview. It was absolute joy. And thank you so much to our viewers. Anything else you'd like to say before we head out?
nothing at all. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. And as always, to our viewers, I'm the center of expression for the primal will to good, and so are you.